This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, we got a special guest on the podcast today. His name is Sam JOLMAN. So he is a licensed professional counselor, and he's the author of the new book called The Sex Talk You Never Got, Reclaiming the Heart of Masculine Sexuality. So I'll tell you right from the beginning here, I was a little worried about this interview. And the reason is because when I was reading through this book, I had a lot of problems with it. Like, there were a lot of things I didn't understand, a lot of things that were very confusing, and some things that I thought were just flat out egregious. We'll get to that, but it's like, crap, the foreword was written by John Eldredge. John Eldredge is a mentor of mine, so I don't want to piss off John, but like, I was kind of getting some Crispin Mayfield vibes. So for those of you that are not familiar with that interview, go back to Undaunted.Life /Crispin Mayfield. So you'll be able to find that and see what I'm talking about. And so, I had got some advice from some other people and had them kind of, give me their thoughts on some of the content. And then I gave them my thoughts, and, we were kind of going into this, but I told Sam off air, like, look, I want to kind of tug a little bit at some of your thoughts, and I really want to dig in because I want to understand. And so I came to this with intellectual honesty and curiosity. And I could not be more thrilled with how the conversation went. So I think he enjoyed the conversation as well, because he was also intellectually honest, and he was welcoming, kind of the tug of war over the content and the phraseology and different things like that. And certainly there are still things that he and I disagree on, but we were really able to dig into, why did he write a book about sex? Why did he feel the need to be the one to write this book? What did 20 years of counseling other men kind of lead to this type of thing and what that looks like? But we got into the sex talk, how most of us, if we got a sex talk at all, it was just once, and it was basically birds and the bees and nothing else, but how parents should really have hundreds, especially fathers. We should have hundreds and hundreds of talks with our kids, even miniature talks about sexuality. But the overall heart of sexuality, male sexuality, what's the difference between sexual and sensual? It seems like those things are synonymous, but they really aren't. But then we started digging into some things that I really didn't understand, which was his overall ideas on awe and beauty, and how men are basically, rewarded for being warring and getting things done on the work side, but not really for anything sensual. But then we talked about, temptation and lust, and, there was a lot of confusion over his phraseology on what actually leads to lust, and how can we look at something that is beautiful, like a woman, and not lust after her, and those types of things. And so we really dig into a lot of the hardest quotes from his book, the stuff that I had the most problems with, where I thought he was being very dismissive of, like, things like the Billy Graham rule, or guys that are doing things actively to flee from sexual immorality, like bouncing their eyes or not watching certain movies or things like that. So we really dug in there. But then also we talked about the purity culture. He had a lot of problems with purity culture. And just so you know, that was kind of the 1990s, early 2000s, Worth the Wait, True Love Waits. But I kind of talked about in the interview, like, look, when I was 15, I got the Worth the Wait ring, and I'm wearing this ring around, basically telling everyone I've still got my V card and I'm going to keep it. And, here I am, having only ever had sex with my wife. And it's like, well, that was a good thing. I don't see how people can look back and be like, oh, I was traumatized by the purity movement. And so we really dug into that. We got into virginity and how, if you lose your virginity, is that irreparable? Can it be repaired, or is it just something that's irredeemable? So we really dig in there. And then we got practical at the end about, okay, so what are dads supposed to do? What can they do to make sure they're having these appropriate conversations with their kids at an appropriate time and at an appropriate volume? And so again, I was worried going in, but I was thrilled with how the finished product turned out. So guys, welcoming to you this podcast. I'm thrilled that it went the way that it did. So I'm not going to keep them from you any longer. So without further ado, let's get into it. Sam JOLMAN, welcome to Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast.
Kyle, it's awesome to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Now, I will say this from the beginning. You kind of flexed on me off air because I told you we have a mutual friend in John Eldredge, and you go, oh, yeah, he's been my friend for like 25 years, and he's only been my friend for like 5 years. So why did you do that? Why did you get us off to such a bad start here?
Dude, I wasn't trying to be punchy. John actually was a surrogate father for me when I was in my early 20s. So, yeah, he's been a good man. I didn't know I was flexing. I didn't know you. It felt like wasn't flexing. Meant to be a flex. Okay.
The reason why it's a flex is because I've said this over and over. So we have a book list on our website, the 100 books every modern Christian man should read list, and then I've got kind of my top 10. And I've said before, the reason why no other men's ministry books sell is because two reasons: one, people suck at writing, or two, they're trying to rewrite Wild at Heart. And it's like, you can't rewrite Wild at Heart. Like, you can't. Right. You can't remake Gladiator, even though they're trying to do a sequel right now. Like, you can't do that. It's against the rules. Right. And so that's the thing, is like, someone's like, when I took a picture with John and posted it online, someone's like, oh man, that guy is, one of the kings. And I'm like, no, he's not one of the kings in men's ministry. He is the king of men's ministry. So I have an incredibly high view of him and the work that he's done via Ransomed Heart and Wild at Heart. So that's why it was a flex, Sam. That's why.
Well, I hope you know, you do know this. John is an endlessly generous man with whoever he sits with. So, 5 years, 25 years, it doesn't really matter. He's a really kind of good man. And he's really stepping into that sage place. He's really passing on to the next generation. So the fact he would write a foreword for my book was super kind, and I'm grateful for it.
Well, very good. And we will get into the book here in just a second. But before we get there, kind of give us like a little bit of a primer, kind of what's your professional background, what kind of, what led you to being like a professional counselor, and then kind of getting into the areas of interest that you're into now.
Yeah. So I was 19 years old, struggling with depression. And my mom, as I mentioned in the book, also struggled with pornography at the time. And my mom said, what do you think about going to see a counselor? So I went to counseling at 19 and met a really, really good man. And that changed my life. And I felt like he did magic. Like, what did you just do? I thought he was going to kind of, get on my case and kind of take me on and confront me and get, kind of challenge me. But he was really, really kind. And that undid something in me. And I found my tears again at 19. And that was an amazing experience to find my heart again. And I sat back with this sense of like, wow, something of God's kindness came through this guy. And I remember saying to him, like, what did you just do? Right? What just happened in this session? He just said it, I'm just being kind. Like, I'm just taking you to your own story. So that really led me to this, like, the magic of sitting well with a person and pursuing their heart, was like, man, if I could do that for a living, I would love to do that. So I've been doing that for 20 years now as a counselor. I'm a father, a dad of 3 boys. So one of them now 13, becoming a young man, and a lover to my wife, 21 years into marriage, and now an author. So wrote my first book, The Sex Talk You Never Got.
All right, let's talk about that. The sex talk that you never got, or the sex talk you never got. I added a word in there. The heart of masculine sexuality. So just overview, we're obviously going to dig into individual quotes and things from the book, but what is this book about? Why you? Why now?
Yeah, so, I think for most men, sexuality is probably the place they had the least meaningful conversations in their life. Maybe we got a purity lecture or, kind of a basic shoddy anatomy lesson. And that's about it. And the implication there, right, for men then is this is just supposed to run itself, right? Well, once you know the plumbing, it just works and you just go, it functions. And that's not true for all men that I sit with. And sitting as a counselor with a lot of guys who would come in and kind of the only way they knew to think about their sexuality was, am I behaving or not behaving? Right? Am I doing good or not good? They didn't know how to enter into their story of sexual formation or into deeper conversations, including things like stories of their own sexual harm, or how to engage their bodies well, or the relational side of sexuality, romance and love with their wife. And so I was like, man, we've got to write something that helps men walk into this better than sex jokes and locker room talk, which gets us nowhere. So, as I say, men are pretty over-sexualized in our culture. We'll often say things like, oh, men just want sex and that's all they need even, right? Just give a man his food and his sex and he's good. And that is so trivializing to men. It does not honor that you have a heart. And there's a lot more to you than just that. So that's what led me to write the book.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and start digging into some of the concepts of the book. And you kind of alluded to it there in your answer, but it's, parents talking to their children about sex. And even colloquially, Sam, we talk about it like it's the sex talk, like it happens one time, like the resurrection or the Super Bowl. Like it's like a thing that happens one time. But I want to read a quote from the introduction here. A study from 2014 revealed about 82% of parents have given their children some sort of sex talk. Yet a Harvard study released in 2017 stated that 70% of young adults aged 18 to 25 wanted more conversations with their parents about sex and romance. That's a huge discrepancy. It shows that what parents are doing is not enough. We need more. As mentioned above, we don't need just one conversation. We need hundreds. And so I will say for me, I got the sex talk. I got the Super Bowl sex talk. That's all I got. And then neither one of my parents are believers and, got divorced when I was 13 and, all that type of stuff. There was no talk of sex. There wasn't even a talk of, you better not have sex, or, hey, if you're going to have sex, wear a condom. There was none of that. There were little comments here or there that I kind of picked up on. But, I was one of those guys that just kind of had to try to find it out on my own as I became a Christian as a teenager as well, which will probably come up again later as well. But why is that so? I get why it's important, but please elucidate that for us plainly so the audience can understand why that's so important.
Well, you think about it, right? If there's something in your life that doesn't get talked about, it inherently gets this kind of pale of shame over it, right? Like we don't talk about that, right? So, sexuality, if it doesn't get talked about, it leads you with this sense of, I guess that's something too shameful to bring up or something, right? And so you've got to figure it out. But, I think of, had some clients that have a 14-year-old son, and they gave me permission to share this story as I share in the book. Their son was talking to some of his buddies at school who are interested in girls, and he realized, oh my gosh, I don't know how to kiss a girl. And so he went to Google, how do you kiss a girl? And instantly what came up was a ton of pornography.
No kidding.
Right? Sites that were search engine optimization, targeting him. And so you think about how to kiss a girl is such an innocent question. That's one of the hundreds of sex talks you need to give to your sons or your daughters, right? Is how do you, my sons asked me the other day, how do you ask a girl out? Right? That's a sex talk, right? And again, you might be like, well, it's not about the plumbing, right? But as I say in the book, there's the mechanics of sex, but then there's the poetics of sex, which is the realm of desire. It's the story that sex was meant to live in. And that's the stuff that we often don't get. I was just on a walk the other day with my boys, and they saw a bumper sticker on a minivan, or sorry, not a minivan, a car that said, condoms save minivans. Right? And they're like, Dad, what's a condom? I don't, that was a 1-minute sex talk explaining what a condom is, right? And so you think if your kids don't get answers from you, they're going to go somewhere else.
That's the key. I think that's the key that you're linking in, because I think about something like that, but there's a certain point where you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. An example I've used on my show a lot, where I talk about some of the dangers of the government school system, is I'm in deep red Oklahoma, right, in a very, very red conservative town, and in the middle school close to my house, a substitute teacher came in one day. They identify as non-binary, which is not a thing. They go up on the board and they write they them on the board, and as opposed to saying, hey, what page did you get to in Lord of the Flies yesterday? It was, hi, my name is such and such so-and-so. I'm non-binary. Does anyone have questions? And so a middle schooler, 12, 13 years old, goes home and they're like, Dad, what's non-binary? What does that, what does that mean? The toothpaste is out of the tube at that point. Now it's damage control. The problem, Sam, is that a lot of men will get that sexual question and they'll run from it, or they'll be like, don't worry about it. Or, right, I'll explain it to you later. And, I guess that kind of gets into really the heart of male sexuality, which here's another quote from the introduction. And you've alluded to this as well. The problem isn't too much sexual desire, but rather too little heart. There is nothing inherently wrong with an aroused man, but somewhere along the way, we lost the heart of male sexuality. I think part of it is because sexuality has been stunted. Part of it is because we get our cues from pornography. And so why are 15-year-old girls showing up to the ER with anal fissures from very violent anal sex? Because young boys see these men giving very violently penetrative anal sex to a woman, and they see the woman moaning and enjoying it. And the girl's also watching the same porn and thinking, I'm supposed to be enjoying this as she's being torn to to pieces, right? And so I think all of this kind of is circling the drain of the heart of male sexuality. So talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, it's easy to see sexuality as initiation. So, for male sexuality to capture this idea of it's a place I'm going to feel power, right? So the young man that sees that same pornography and thinks that's what I got to do to feel like a man. Look how that guy's scoring, right? Look how he's getting some, so to speak. Without a fatherly voice, sexuality is going to take the place of initiation, to where that will be what will make him feel potent and powerful, rather than a father blessing a young man's heart and saying your heart is the center of your power, is nothing else. Everything else radiates from your heart. So everything else you do in your life, your work, your war, everything will come from that heart. So without that blessing, right, without that understanding that your heart runs it all, you're going to get things like that kind of initiation where boys go to their buddies and think that's how I'm going to get initiated and feel powerful, is who I score with.
Yeah, I think initiation, that was not something I really thought about when I was reading the early part of your book, but I wish I would have, because I would have asked you about it, but you brought it up, so I'll just go ahead and talk about it. Like the initiation thing, I talk about that. We don't do rites of passage anymore. And so if you don't initiate a young man into manhood, he will figure it out a different way. So maybe it's when he gets jumped into the gang. Maybe it's when he, has sex with a girl for the first time. Maybe it's when he leaves home. Maybe it's when he gets his first job, buys his first. Make it up. We make up when manhood starts. And then you hear about these horrible stories of these young boys. I mean, young boys, like less than 10 years old, having sex with grown women, and dads maybe buying a prostitute for their young son to all right, well, let's make you a man. It's almost like a macabre version of the Boy Named Sue, Johnny Cash song, where it's like, hey, I'm not going to be around. And so let me make you a man real quick. Even though I'm basically giving you the keys to a sports car and you've never driven anything before. But it also kind of gets into the dichotomy, I guess you could say, or maybe the opposing forces, or maybe not opposing forces, but things that should work in concert that we don't see in concert. And that's the difference of sexual versus sensual. So I do want to read a quote. I think this is from the introduction as well. We don't often talk about sensuality in this way too easily making the mistake of equating sensuality with sexuality, but they are different. All of life can be sensual. Not all of life can be sexual. So what did you mean by that?
Yeah, so your senses were given to you by God to explore the world. And obviously some of that's for survival, right? That so you don't freeze to death. You can feel when you're cold, right? Or you don't eat rotten food, right? Because it smells nasty. Like that's sensuality. It's for survival. But I believe it was God given also for your pleasure. This place was meant to lead you to fall in love with God, right? As a worshiper of God. So you think of like a good cigar. What is a good cigar? Why would somebody enjoy that, right? It's all sensuality. It's the smell, right? It's the taste. What makes, the difference between a convenience store cigar and a really good one? It's all sensuality. You have to become an aficionado, so to speak, right? Or how do you know when a steak is like well done, just right? Not well done, but done well, right?
Amen.
It's taste.
A well done medium rare is what you were trying to say. There you go.
Exactly. I am a medium rare guy. So, like I went to a friend's graduation party for his son this last May, and he had smoked all the meat for the party. And I was like, dude, you did well. This is really good. And he's like, it's okay. And I'm like, it's okay. That's an aficionado. He knows he can nail it a little better.
Yeah.
Right. That's sensuality. You have 4,000 taste buds in your mouth, and those were given by God so that you can enjoy the pleasure of food. You were given eyes to see, right? So that you can enjoy things like sunsets and sunrises that God does every day for you, right? That's sensuality. And I think as men, we don't, we're so used to soldiering on and pushing through and getting things done that it's hard to stop. And I find, for men to have rituals of rest and pleasure, right? Good pleasure, that's hard for men to find their way back to healthy sensuality in their lives. Living here in Colorado, we have ghost towns, right? And I've walked several of these, and the bygone era of the gold rush days. And talk about hardworking men, right? You see like the mountains of rock these guys literally dug out with pickaxes. What was given to these guys for rest, for restoration? Saloons and brothels. Yeah. Right? That's not healthy sensuality. They didn't get restoration. They got numbing at a saloon or a lady of the night. So I'm inviting men back to, if you're going to find the heart of your sexuality, you've got to find that place back to, what I call in the book, the lover within, that place that enjoys the sensuality of life, the beautiful moments of life. A beautiful sunset or beautiful sex with your wife.
So I think that's an important thing, because I've thought about before. Matt Chandler was actually the first guy during a sermon. He talked about, do you know how crazy it is that we have taste buds? Like because we're not just eating and it's going into our bodies and it's sustaining us until the next meal. It's like, no, when you drink that Pappy Van Winkle 20 or have that, cigar from cigars.com, the Undaunted.Life cigar, which is the best one, when you're having that, when you're tasting it, it's like, that is a thing that is literally there for your pleasure. And then you'll have, evolutionary biologists that'll be like, well, actually, it's just the sweetness that's going into your blah, 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 so that you'll seek out the next thing. But isn't it so interesting? A, person that thinks we're just beings dancing to our DNA, they never can answer why human beings gaze at the sky. Because like birds don't look at the sky and look at the wonder of the sky. They don't look up and, think to themselves, oh, I can't believe, lion's not like, I can't believe I ate a baby zebra again. I just can't believe I did that. Hopefully the thing up there is, actually not going to judge me for that. But like as humans, we can see things right up close, but we can also see things far away. And evolutionists is like, well, we can see, the moose far away because we need to kill that so we can sustain. But it's like, but it doesn't answer the greater questions that kind of go outside of like the why. It's like, you can describe the what, kinda, but science still can't explain yawning. And y'all are trying to explain to me why, something came from nothing. It's like, give me a break.
Right. Yeah. There is a scientific name for that emotion that you're describing. It's called awe. Right. And awe is this studied emotion. But you're right. Other mammals don't experience awe like humans do. But every human feels awe, and it's a studied emotion that's on the upper reaches of pleasure and on the edge of fear, right? That sort of trembling, but being drawn to something, that God made us to experience in the world. I actually think sexuality is also meant to be an experience of awe, at its heart.
Yeah, very good. And I understood as you were going through, you do talk about awe quite a bit in this book. I'm going to circle back to something because, again, 95% of the people listening to this podcast are men right now. And so if they were to read this section here, I didn't really quite understand your point. So I want to see if you could maybe like dig down and help me a little bit. I'm going to read a quote here. I'm not sure from what chapter 1 or 2. Men are not honored for being sensual. So this goes back to what we were just talking about. We are honored for our suffering and working and warring. That's what the world expects of us in the mash of its gears. We need to produce, meet that deadline, shoulder the weight of leadership, take no breaks. When do we have time for the beautiful? So I was somewhat confused because even when we see in Genesis 1, so I'll read Genesis 1:26 here. Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over the livestock and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So from the beginning, we see God creating man to work, to have dominion. So yes, I think we should honor men for working, warring, producing, meeting the deadline, shouldering the weight of leadership, all that type of stuff. Yes. But the tone of that paragraph, it almost sounded like you lament that we do that. So why is that?
So tone, I would change there. No, I'm honoring that. What I'm not honoring is when there's no space given for a man to stop and rest. So I was at a men's retreat.
Is that back to the thing you were talking about with like the saloons and the whiskey? Like that was the only thing we gave them for a hard day's work. Okay.
Right. So, I was at a men's retreat recently, a couple weeks ago, and I was teaching on healthy sensuality. How do you find healthy rest in your life? And I asked the guys to raise their hands. How many of you eat through lunch? Or how many of you don't stop for lunch?
Yeah.
Right. Or, you think of the guys, the iconic story of a man who works till he's 65 and retires, and a year later he dies. What is that, right? That a man has worked himself to the bone and he doesn't stop to actually take in and experience, spirituality with God, let alone healthy sensuality in his life or connection with his family, right? I'm trying to get at the forces that come against a man's ability to stop and rest well, or take in healthy sensuality. No, I am absolutely honoring. It is good. It is a good thing that a man feels the weight of meaningful work in his life. I'm just lamenting, if that's the only thing we celebrate a man for, something's missing.
Hey guys, real quick. As you've heard me describe before, I am incredibly conservative about the supplements that I take. I spent years being terrified of putting different products in my body because I didn't know what they were made with, or if it was going to be kind of fly-by-night companies using all kinds of crazy ingredients. So I've always wanted to partner with an American company that only uses the highest quality ingredients, and that's why I want to remind you that we are partnered with Jocko Fuel. Jocko Fuel is Jocko Willing's supplement company that is based here in the United States. So what are some of my favorite products that they make? So they make whey protein powder, and guys, they just released a cookies and cream flavor not that long ago, and it is ridiculously good. Make sure you use it with milk. It makes it even better. They also make clean energy drinks. I finally decided what my favorite was, and that's pink lemonade. That is my favorite of all their flavors. But they also have the best tasting greens powder on the market. I prefer the peach flavor myself. They also make pre-workout and ready-to-drink protein. So I actually mix the ready-to-drink protein in my boys' milk, and they love it. They're constantly like, Dad, banana milk. So we got to hook that up in the Thompson household. But I also use their krill oil, fish oil, creatine, vitamin D, and their sleep aids. And guys, they've got new stuff coming out all the time, and a bunch of stuff I didn't even have time to mention. Guys, if you take your health and wellness seriously, then you simply can't afford to put cheap and inconsistent supplements inside of your body. Try Origin out today by going to www.jockofuel.com. That's jockofuel.com. Use the promo code Undaunted to get 10% off your order. Again, that's jockofuel.com, promo code Undaunted to get 10% off your order. Yeah, I think that's actually helpful because most men will go where the attaboys are available. And so if you're highly conscientious, so like for me, if I got B's, I was grounded, right? And so if I got A's, I also didn't get pats on the head. And so I had to search for attaboys somewhere because it's like, well, I'm getting all these A's, and so I got some of the attaboys from teachers or professors or something like that because I wasn't getting it from anywhere else. So that is actually very helpful. That makes way more sense than the way that I read it. So I appreciate the clarification. So I want to get into another quote here. So this is two quotes that are, in the same chapter, but they're on the same theme. And then I got some questions here. So furthermore, given that men on average have a higher sex drive, i.e. a more frequent desire for sex, a woman may feel pressure to give a man his required, you use that in quotes, required dose of sex. It is sometimes even said that if she doesn't, he will succumb to the temptation of porn or seeking another woman to meet his need. This mindset obligates women to a duty and keeps men immature and at the mercy of an urge. And then a little bit later in the chapter, you say this: the church is often guilty of perpetuating this model drive in scare quotes, for understanding sexual desire, reading it into Paul's words to husbands and wives in 1 Corinthians 7:5, do not deprive each other. This perpetuates what author Sheila Ray Gregory has called the obligation sex message, which teaches that we must never say no to our spouse's expressed interest in sex. But if no one is dying from the lack of sex, Paul's instruction against deprivation reads a lot different. With the proper context of sexual desire rather than the drive model, not depriving each other still leaves lots of room for saying no. So as I read through that section, I was kind of pondering it, and I read on the publishers are awesome because they send me PDFs and I upload it into my iPad so I can just write all over it because I can't write in a physical book. It brings me like physical pain. So thank you to all the publishers that do that, and thank you to your publisher. So I think if a wife were to read those passages in your book, that she might come away feeling justified in not meeting her husband's sexual needs or desires or wants or whatever you want to call it. And really the truth is, especially with the men that I talk to, is that when their wife is not satisfying her husband sexually, and what I don't mean is Cirque du Soleil sex or the same sex that they see in porn, but when they're not getting sexual release and not getting sexual connection, and perhaps not even trying to, their wives aren't even trying, that it 100% leads to more temptation for these men. Temptation to look at porn, temptation to, have lunch with that gal at work or to have an affair. And, 1 Corinthians 7:5, I do want to read the entire reference here. Do not deprive one another except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer, but then come together again so that Satan may not tempt you. So that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. And so I don't want to belittle men and say, oh, you haven't had sex in 3 days? Yeah, you should probably go look at porn and jerk off. But I do know guys that are in, sexless marriages. So maybe they're having sex 4 or 5 times a year, or their wives are using sex as a weapon to control their husbands or things like that. And so I was a little bit concerned with that section about a woman coming away being like, oh, I'm actually justified in this because he's not going to die. Blue balls aren't going to explode and he's not going to bleed out. But it does have a real mental impact on men, specifically men that I know personally. So give me some more on that if you don't mind.
Yeah, the premise there is obviously that no one dies from lack of sex. So this idea that we call it a drive, I'm just trying to mess with the language there that, because a lot of times this is how we also over-sexualize men. We think like, oh, you need sex and food and you're good, right? Back to that. And oftentimes when a man says to me, he needs sex, right? I feel it like sex is a need for me. It's often a need for something else in his body that he's getting through sex. So often some sort of what would be called emotional regulation. So I'm just trying to invite men out of the body confusion of you're going to die if you don't get sex. This is a need. This is an urge you can't resist, right? Into the understanding this is desire. You can play with it. You can mess with it. You can talk with it. You can also grow in it, right? And back to the passage you read, the Paul's section, he ends by saying, that you'd be tempted because of your lack of self-control. So I'm inviting men, obviously, that we all need to mature into self-control that you can't say, well, my wife didn't give me sex. And obviously I hear you agreeing with this, you can't blame your wife and say, well, she didn't give me sex, so I had to go somewhere else. Of course right? Not. To say like, that's not how it works. Sorry. No. But, a good man would not say that. So I understand most men won't be saying that. But, I think if sex is mutually pleasurable, emotionally connecting, and intimate, and this is coming from Sheila Gregoire, it tends to take away the issues of desire discrepancy. So a woman, the idea, the premise that you have there is that a woman doesn't want sex. And I would say if sex is mutually pleasurable, right, and intimate and connecting, that desire discrepancies tend to take care of themselves. So I'd probably say I don't think women are trying to not have sex, right? Just to torture their husbands without it. Now, are there marriages that are sexless? Yes. Are they painful? My goodness, yes.
Man.
Right? Because it's not just that there's a lack of sex. There's probably a lack of romance and intimacy. Sure. That's backing that up, right? Like what's in the way? But I also sit with just as many women who say to me, my husband never has sex with me. He just has sex with porn. So I have more women coming to my office saying that. Why doesn't my husband pursue me anymore sexually?
Sam, so, I've heard of women that are literally, this is so heartbreaking. I'm trying to control even just describing this. I've heard of women that will hold the phone above their head with porn on it while their husband is having sex because he can't maintain an erection otherwise. Think about the level of evil and depravity that is going on there, because you would think, I'm assuming here, she's trying to do the right thing. She's trying to give access, but it's vaginal masturbation that's happening. Right. And she's helping facilitate that. And my goodness. But anyway, go ahead. I was just it mushrooms out into a way worse thing than we can even imagine.
Right. And I mean, that's back to the, the poetics of sex. There's the mechanics, right? But the poetics run the whole show. The poetics is the story. What's the story that's animating your sexuality, right? If you get used to porn scripts, right, then you do need, a porn script, literal porn, to be able to be sexual and stay aroused, right? So I'm inviting, a conversation back to, what's animating your sexuality. And again, I would say if it's mutually pleasurable, right, and you have the capacity as a man to be intimate and emotionally connected to your wife, because sex is a skill-based activity, right? We don't talk about that. It takes growth into how to be a good lover to your partner. But if you engage that well, right, it tends to invite. And again, I'm not saying that's marriage for marriage here, right? There might be other issues going on.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, a good woman would want to show up to that.
Sure. Okay. Can I ask you a controversial question? Potentially
Totally.
controversial. Okay. Because I've had this thought. I don't think I voiced it before. Maybe I have. Maybe I have, and it just went under everybody's radar. So everybody focus in, clip this, and put this on all the websites. Okay. When a prominent Christian pastor falls sexually, they are, rightfully so, just dragged for it, right? And, we might get into some of those examples later. But just think about it. So everybody looking right now, think about it, over the last 20 years, prominent pastor who destroys their life because of an affair or something like that. It's not the first thing I think about, Sam, but one of the first things I think about is I wonder if anyone is going to ask his wife how she feels about it and whether or not she was trying to meet his sexual desires or needs. Because, and again, I'm assuming a lot in that question, but I'm just being honest about where my mindset goes, because even if she's completely locked down, right? Chastity belt, you as a man still have to control yourself, because you can't go to heaven and be like, well, why'd you give me this woman? Let's go back to the garden. Like you can't blame God for giving you the woman. You can't blame the woman for you abdicating your responsibility, right? I get it. But why don't we ask if the wives are doing their duty as a dutiful and loving wife? Why is the focus only on the man? And even as I'm asking it, I know the answer that I would give, which is the man is responsible for his own actions. He can't point at somebody else. But why don't we ask the question? Like, why are we so gun shy about that?
Well, again, I think at some level it's good we don't. For this reason, lust is about power more than it's about sex. So acting out like that is often a script of power. Back to what we talked about, right? If you don't get initiated in a good fatherly way, sex becomes this really powerful but unhelpful substitute.
A control mechanism of some kind, maybe?
Well, again...
you said like self-regulation type thing.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to honor there is that without initiation, you're going to look for something else, right? And sex becomes that place to feel power. So I think when we think about like pastors or leaders that sexually get caught in an affair, oftentimes there's a power differential at play, right? That it's not just about the feeling of I needed sexual release. There's also this sense of I needed to feel power. I needed that attaboy somewhere, right? That's often what lust is about more than it's about, gosh, I just am lonely for sex. That's just not the picture of lust that I would paint. The other thing I'd want to honor is, again, back to, yes, where is this guy going to get care? Would be a question I would want to ask. So maybe that's connected to what you're saying. Okay. Like where can he be off the clock? You think of a powerful, a pastor or leader, right? It'd be hard to have friends because everybody's going to look to you to be the man, right? Do the thing, do the magic trick, right? You're the powerful pastor. Say the thing that's going to change my life. Where does that guy have to go fall apart?
Yeah.
And be a mess and get care?
Dude, that's a good word. That's a good word because I've heard Matt Chandler and Joby Martin, two good buddies of mine and good friends of the show, talk about, hey man, it's monies and honeys. That's what's taken down. That's what Satan's using to take down a lot of these pastors. And a lot of it, these guys, is because they are completely insulated. They don't have elder boards. They have a board of directors. And this board of directors can't vote them out, right? They can't even vote them out of their ministry. They can't bring any type of accountability for any of their actions. And so the person is insulated. And here's the other thing is I try to surround myself with people that are not very impressed by me. Right. So I've done some pretty cool things and I have kind of a unique job, but I want people that are okay interrupting me. I want people that don't laugh at my jokes that aren't funny.
Yeah.
But if you're the guy, right, you're selling all the books and you're doing all the thing and you just don't have guys like that around you, gosh, it's potentially deadly. But you brought up lust there, Sam. And so I want to park there for just a second because I want to get into a deeper conversation about that. So let me read a quote here from the book. It gets worse. There are other ways many churches have driven a wedge between us and our sensual connection with our bodies. If you got a sex talk at all or found one in a Christian book on male sexuality, there's a good chance that you were heavily warned about the terrifying nature of sexual lust. Don't get me wrong, lust is a real thing. Jesus warned strongly about it, identifying it as a form of covetousness in Matthew 5:27 through 28. We should be on guard against it. But what is lust? It's rarely defined outright. In many religious contexts, it's implied that lust is a feeling you get whenever you see a beautiful person. If an attractive woman stands next to you at Starbucks and you look at her and feel good feelings in your body, you've lusted. And the solution is usually some version of run, flee, bounce your eyes, shut it down, never be alone in a room with a woman, freak out. And by the way, the teaching goes, since lust is also every man's albatross, you can be assured you are guilty. So aside from the fact that no one should ever go to Starbucks because they give a ton of money to Planned Parenthood, which kills all the babies, we'll leave that aside for now. Everyone gets the colloquial reference there. But I'm a little confused by the quote for a few reasons. So you say that most men were warned about the terrifying nature of lust. And I would say, yeah, I think we should be warned of that because lust is a sin in and of itself, and it very often leads to sexual sin. So you mentioned Matthew 5:27, 28. You didn't quote it there, but you say it's a form of covetousness. But if you read that passage, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And so it seems like covetousness is like the secondary sin, if you could rank order that. The primary sin is sexual, but coveting another man's wife would kind of be secondary. And then it also seems, Sam, and again, I'm teeing you up to try to help me understand. You seem to be somewhat dismissive of attempts by men to keep from lusting after women. So you say, run, flee, bounce your eyes, shut it down, never be alone in a room with a woman. But going back to scripture, Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 6:18, flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but the sexually immoral person sins against his own body. So sexual sin is not in the same category as other sins. According to God, it is wholly different. And yeah, for me, it's like, for sure, let's bounce our eyes. Like you have guys that'll say, like, I'm having trouble stopping looking at porn and masturbating. But part of the problem is because they'll see women in public or on the internet, and then they succumb to the temptation to masturbate to the point of climax, thinking about those women. They didn't flee from the temptation. They didn't bounce their eyes. They lingered. And as we just talked about, a lot of pastors have violated the Billy Graham rule. A lot of modern people are really bad about the Billy Graham rule. They think it's terrible, never be alone with another woman. But just this year, Sam, it was discovered that 3 huge guys in Christendom have completely blown up their lives and their ministries because of sexual immorality. So we have Tony Evans, which as far as we can tell, looks like he just had sex outside of marriage. We have Steve Lawson, who just came out recently, that he was having an extramarital affair with a woman that was more than half a century younger than him. He was basically leading a second life with this woman. And then Robert Morris was discovered, allegedly, to be a pedophilic rapist. And so this isn't just a big deal, it's an enormous deal. And yes, I guess these guys, who really appreciates these guys fleeing from sexual immorality and bouncing their eyes and never being alone with another woman? It's their wives, right? I bet Billy Graham's wife really loved the Billy Graham rule because she never had to worry. So with that said, Sam, I know that was kind of a long tee-up, but I'm just trying to even verbally process as I'm saying it out loud. I don't really understand the point because I came away thinking that you were minimizing lust and not really helping me understand what lust actually is. So help me.
Yeah, what I'm trying to do is invite men back into their bodies. So this sense that oftentimes I think when men repent of lust, they actually or repent of the flesh, they actually are repenting of having a body. So I'm trying to engage this idea. Again, there was a study done that, asked by Sheila Gregoire that asked, is lust every man's battle? And 80% of men self-reported, yes, lust is my daily battle. But when she actually asked questions that would clarify, right, and give validity to that, the integrity of that answer from a research standpoint, she asked a bunch of questions that would seem to validate that, and she found that only 33% of men showed any discernible lust behaviors from the experiences they were calling lustful, meaning. Her conclusion is these guys, 33% did disclose they struggled, but 80% or 33% showed they did have some lust behavior, but 80% said they struggled. So what's going on there? Her sense of the discrepancy, which is a big one, right? 50% was that these men were just experiencing and being moved by beauty and misunderstood it as lust. So what I'm inviting is, for example, I had a friend that said to me, he said, this was back in March, I really enjoy watching Caitlin Clark play basketball. Yeah. The women's, she's now in the women's NBA. This was March Madness for Iowa. And he said, I don't think it's lust, but I'm really drawn to her. What is that? Right? It doesn't feel sexual. I said, I think you're being moved with awe. I think you're just being moved she's an incredible athlete and she has finesse on the court, and watching her drill a three, right, from 35 feet out is incredible to watch in itself. So what I'm inviting is, again, I think there's a way in which a man can just assume and almost be terrified of his own body, that anything that moves in me must be lust. And so I need to be terrified of it. And I'm trying to invite a more mature engagement with your body, that it is possible to simply be moved by the beautiful in another person and not go to lust. And that can be a form of maturity.
All right. Pretend I'm on your couch in your office at this point, because as I've told people before, I'm not drawn to the chemical. So alcohol is not a problem for me. Illicit drugs, it's just never been a pull for me. My pull 100% is lust. And so if I was in part of, that woman's study or something like that, I would have been in the 33% that said, not only do I struggle, but I got the receipts, right? So there's a section of the book where you kind of get into purity culture, and we'll talk about that more, overall here in a second. But you talk about a man, I'm trying to remember exactly, but there was a man and a woman sitting at, coffee or dinner or something like that. And the man tells the woman that, hey, babe, I've gotten my lust under control. Whatever that means, whatever they meant in that time or however he said it. But then an attractive woman walks by their table, and his wife, I guess, testing him, obviously, asked her husband if he noticed the woman, and he said no. And then you actually write this. Here's a quote. Something in this man had died on his path to purity. This is the fruit of the church's obsession with sexual purity, which we'll get more into here in a second. We teach women that their bodies are scandalous and that men's desires must die. But the thing is I would say amen. Our desires, and I guess this is the key point, Sam, is our desires for women who are not our wives should die. Absolutely. And for me, and again, this is a man's podcast, so guys, we may get a little crass here, but you're 45 minutes into a podcast about sex. So if you're still listening with your kids, what's wrong with you, weirdo? But back in the day, 15 years ago is when I got porn and masturbation out of my life, right? And if I saw an attractive woman in public, it was going to be almost impossible. And again, I'm warning you ahead in advance. This is going to seem crass, but I know a lot of guys in my audience will understand. It was going to be almost impossible for me to not log that woman in my spank bank for later, right? To not think about that woman and what if we got in my car and what if we did this and what if, all the things that guys do when they go from voyeurism to fantasy, right? And so for me, I literally could not look at women in public and not lust after them. And I think a lot of guys heard me describe it and they're like, dude, me too. I thought I was crazy. I thought I needed to be institutionalized. And so that's the thing for me is I'm like, if a guy's like, hey, I'm going to bounce my eyes and I'm not going to check out any women, I'm like, amen, brother. And I bet your wife's going to love it. So help me understand. Cause I'm like, that's what got me out of the rotation of looking at the woman, lusting after her and then masturbating. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so what I would want to invite is behaviorally, right? You might be able to stop, but what I'm most curious about and where I think you need to do, a guide in this case, obviously you described this as 15 years ago, but a guy in this case, the question is, what's the story you're writing in your head? What's the fantasy that you're writing? That's where you need to go and be curious. That's how you're going to be set free, because that script is something about your life. Right? That is being almost like a dream, right? You have a dream. I had a dream that I, was in a war the other night, right? I didn't wake up, confessing my sins for shooting a bunch of people, right? I was in a war.
Unless they deserved it.
Right. Yeah. Right. But like, I didn't wake up saying like, oh God, forgive me, for murdering a bunch of people last night in my dream. I woke up saying, whoa, what was that about? Right? Like, do I have some pent up anger? What showed up in my dream, right? I was paying attention to the script of the dream. Well, it was me and two other guys, and we were clearing this section of woods in this town. I think I had just read something about the war in Ukraine, and so I was like in that zone before I went to bed, right? But like, so my question is, what's happening the hour before you had that struggle with lust? What's going on in your life? Or what's the script? So I tell the story in the book of a guy, he's driving home from work. He calls his wife to ask her, if, does he need to pick anything up from the grocery store? She gives this list of things to pick up from the grocery store. He forgets one. He gets home. His wife's disappointed that he forgot something. It was for the meal that night. So they're struggling relationally. She's disappointed in him. That night, he looks at porn. He comes in the next day and tells me this story, he confesses like, yeah, I looked at porn, and which is always a brave admission from a man. And then he says to me, well, what I asked him was, well, tell me what happened. And he tells me the story of missing the item from the grocery store. And I asked him, what did you look at? Like, let's talk about what you actually look at. Porn is a very general statement that describes something. But what were you looking for in pornography? And he says to me, well, I guess I was looking, after some reflection, I guess I was looking for a woman with a really genuine smile. Whoa. Right? In other words, what did he bring to pornography? It wasn't just lust, right? Like, oh, I just have an overactive sex drive and I was just struggling. There was a whole story that led up to that moment. He was looking for kindness, a woman with a really genuine smile in his pornography, right? That was all about what he had not gotten in his marriage. Now, again, bringing it to pornography is not kind to his wife. It is a form of adultery, and he's not bringing, that could have been a conversation with his wife about what he really needed. Like, hey, honey, I feel like I've lost your affection. Like, how do I get, I'm sorry about the missed food. But that led even deeper for him as we talked. It wasn't just what he missed that night in his marriage, but we started to talk about, he said, the only time I ever got my mother's smile is when I was giving her back rubs and she got to lament all her heartache about my dad.
Yeah.
So that search in pornography was about so much in this guy's story, right? So what I'm inviting is, when you said like I was going to go back to my car and write a whole fantasy, where I'd want to go, Kyle, is to say, well, what was the script? What was the fantasy? And what does that tell you about what you really need? Right? My sense of Jesus is he was always so very kind and curious to the sexually broken. He sat with them and asked them really curious questions. He was kind to them. And I think he wants to do the same with you. So it's not just, hey, shut it down, shut it down, shut it down, shut it down. I'm saying be curious, be curious, be curious, be curious. What? It's not just, oh, you're just having overactive sex drive. It's what are you bringing to this moment? What story are you writing in your head about that person you just saw that's beautiful? What's the fantasy?
Let me ask you a follow-up question on that, because that's actually very helpful, because I obviously didn't get that whenever I was reading. So let's just take a scenario, because you wouldn't believe some message I get from guys. It's like, dude, I don't know you. Why are you telling me these things? But
yeah,
let's say a guy's in your office and, you same scenario with that other guy, talks about masturbation, and then you say, hey, what were you thinking about? What happened beforehand? All that types of thing. And let's say in his fantasy, because I know guys that fantasize about their wives, about the things that their wives won't do. And so guys, use your own creativity, use your own imagination, and I think you can fill in the blanks for me. But these are guys that are literally masturbating or just daydreaming, thinking about their wives not doing things that they would like to try in the bedroom, or things that they would like that would feel good to them, and they think it's anathema to even mention it. Like, how would you help that person? Like, because that probably needs to be a conversation with their wife. I had a guy the other day, I'm trying to remember the circumstances, but I think his wife was pregnant and there was some sort of complication that was going on. So they weren't going to be able to have vaginal sex, and vaginal sex is the only sex that his wife was willing to give. And so he asks me, Kyle, is it okay if I masturbate thinking about my wife and my wife only? I was like, well, first of all, if you can masturbate and only think about your wife, you're like a super stud mental person, because like if things don't drift. But it's also like, sex outside of the covenant of marriage between one man and one woman is sinful. So having sex with your left or right hand is also inherently sinful. But how would you help a man like that, I guess, Sam, work through those feelings, or maybe have that conversation with his wife and say like, hey, babe, I'd really like to do this or try this. And it's not because, hey, I saw this in a porn and I always wanted to try it, but it's like, hey, I think this would make me feel good and, keep me from fantasizing about doing it if we actually do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the first thing I'd say is actually not a conversation with your wife as much as, can you journal about it? What is it about that act that would feel good? What would you love about it? Right? So that you are sifting some of your own erotic, like scripts, right? What has shaped that in your story? What has shaped that in your life? Is there something connected there? Because I mean, as a counselor, of course, I hear the same sorts of things, like guys, that fantasize about, other people involved, right? And they're like, what do I do with this fantasy? Like, I know it's wrong, but I feel like it grips me. And I'm like, explore it with God in a journal, right? Not literally in person, but to sit with, what would that give you? Right? What would that feel like? So that I would start there. But then I would also add, sex at its heart, I believe, is a form of play. It is a place our romance is meant to play. Now, again, it's not the only place I think you're meant to play in your marriage, right? I do think like playing. My wife is a very competitive card player or basketball player. So when we play, right, it's fun because this competitive side of her comes out, and it's a totally different way of us relating than like the tasks of the day or the hugs, right? As I see more of her in our play, even in like a basic card game, right? So that's a place our romance plays, but sex is meant to be another place you play together. So I think if it's introduced as, hey, this is a place I'd love to play, right? Obviously, consent is essential. So if the person says, I'm uncomfortable with that, okay.
Yeah, it's right.
Right. But, wonderful that you can try to bring, to your sex life, playfulness, so that it's not just, again, the dutiful, I have a need and let's get it done. But that it actually is a place of play. You think of like, Song of Songs, our erotic psalter, as one writer described it, right? It's just a bunch of erotic love poetry, right? This is a couple that play.
Sure.
Right? He is writing very descriptive things about his wife's body and what he's doing and what she's doing to his, right? They're playing. Now, again, they're not just playing with their bodies. They're also playing with romance and settings and, literally writing poetry to each other. So, my invitation is, yes, it'd be wonderful if you're bringing it in a playful way that allows the other person to say no if it feels uncomfortable.
Okay. If we had more time, I'd want to dig into that, but I think it's important to move on. But that is helpful to kind of think, okay, how does the script work? Are you lacking in play? Just imagine being a kid or even a dog that's like not able to play, like what that would do mentally. Like we've all seen a sad puppy to where it's like, well, they're not playing. They're not able to run. They're not able to do all this stuff. So, I mean, I know we're not dogs, guys, don't send me emails, but I do want to back up and talk a little bit about purity culture because the sense I get is that you just weren't really a fan of purity culture at all. Kind of the worth the wait, true love waits thing that was really popular. And then you have the guy that deconstructed that wrote, I Kissed Dating Goodbye. And so it's like, was that guy ever even a Christian or did he just sell a lot of books for Christian publishers? But I want to read a quote here from the book. Making purity the goal of your sexuality is a really bad idea. Purity is not in service to all. Oh, sorry. Purity that is not in service to all bludgeons a person's body and being. So many men and women in the church were traumatized by purity culture, which I believe is inherently abusive. It violates the very glory of God within us, that our beings are made to be moved, aroused, and awed. And it disassociates people from their bodies, setting them up for further sexual abuse and violation because they no longer know their bodies. So just to be honest with you, Sam, like the word I wrote in the margin after I read that paragraph was egregious. Like there was so much in that paragraph that I somewhere between didn't understand and vehemently disagreed with. So my church, I didn't grow up in church, but I started going to church in middle school because that's where all the hot girls were. And then when I was 15, this hellfire and brimstone preacher came in and I accepted Christ and all that. And apparently we couldn't afford the true love waits guy. So we got the worth the wait guy. And so here I am 15 years old, having never had sex. And I've got my purity ring and I go up there and I sign the pledge and do all that. And for me, I've only ever had sex with my wife. And it's partially because I wore a dang wedding ring that said worth the wait around my entire teenage years. And then I got married when I was 22 and now I get to, have sex with my wife. And so I think when people look back on the purity movement or whatever company that they brought to their church and they say, oh, it traumatized me. I'm like, oh my gosh, trauma? You were traumatized? Because, purity culture encourages girls to keep their legs closed and encourages boys to keep it in their pants until marriage. I don't see how that is in any way abusive because unless you are sexually pure, unless you are having sex within a covenantal marriage of one man and one woman, you're not honoring God with your sexuality. And I think when you say it's setting people up for further sexual abuse and violation, I was like, whoa. Like it seemed like you went from third gear to 18th gear with that question because it's like, it kind of puts the onus on the person that, hey, if you bought into this purity culture thing, you actually opened yourself up to sexual exploitation. As a man that has never experienced sexual exploitation from either side, I'm not speaking from experience, but for me, I didn't get the point of the paragraph. I just didn't really come away with the conclusions that you did there. So I know there's a lot there in that question and a lot there in that paragraph. And you're even giggling when I started to read it. So it's like you expected me to ask about it. So let's go.
Well, I'm laughing at myself more than anything. Like I went for it. I did go to 18th gear. As I hear myself, I'm like, wow. I'm laughing not in any way at your question. And I do want to clarify that. It's a very... you can laugh at me. I'm literally a redheaded stepchild. You can laugh all you want. No, I'm laughing at myself because I swung for the fences there. Yeah. And like, wow, I'm being invited to sit with my own words. So that's what my laughter is. And rightfully so. I'm glad you're inviting me to sit with my words. I'm very okay with that. I would want to honor the purity movement was well intended as a response to the sexual revolution. It was an attempt by the church to create some sort of sexual ethic, right? That's different than the culture of free love and, do what you want. So, obviously I had a different experience. Clearly, my wife and I did read, Josh Harris's books on purity, and it was damaging to our relationship. And it took a lot of years for us to unwind a lot of what was said there. And I think what I'm addressing is this idea that women are responsible for male lust and they have to dress modest, that they need to bear the responsibility of not being seductive, and that men are animals with urges that can't be controlled, and that you really have to fight that. I think those two things are what's damaging, because it puts the weight of not being, seductive on women, and it puts this idea that you're an animal on men. And I think that creates body confusion for men, and it creates inadvertent shame for women. Jesus said, if you're struggling with lust, right, he went as far as to say, gouge out your eye.
Yeah.
It wasn't go tell women to dress different. It was deal with yourself and grow up.
But with that, Sam, like, you would encourage a woman to not dress with a plunging neckline shirt at church and a short skirt. Like, that's a good idea, right? Like, because their modesty is a biblical value.
If it's an honoring and owning of their own body and the value and worth of their own body, right? So what I'm inviting is that bodies are not inherently shameful in themselves, right? God did not give us clothing, I believe, because our bodies are shameful. He gave us clothing because our bodies are sacred. That it is glorious things in the Bible that are covered up, right? Moses' face is veiled, right? The temple, you think of the Ark of the Covenant is covered. The temple has the curtain on it. So what I'm inviting is, it is glorious things that are invited to be covered and clothed. So if we can start with honoring the body as a glorious work of art, and then from there, invite a woman to think, how do you want to veil your body as a glorious thing, right? But if you start with saying, cover your body, you're scripting shame to a woman.
Well,
if you don't first say, your body is amazing and a work of art, now how do you want to engage that work of art?
Okay, this might get a little bit granular, but I totally mean it, because I want people to have things that are actionable that they can take away from this, whether they have daughters or sons, or they're looking at themselves or their spouses. But there are women that it's almost like no matter what they do, they're not going to be able to hide what mama gave them or what God gave them, right? And so that is a struggle. But I've heard women before say something along the lines, I'm just getting to the end of the point here. They're like, look, I know I'm hot, but I don't want to lead men into temptation, and I don't want men to lust after me, and I don't want unwanted attention from gross men. And so I'm going to dress modestly because that's what I feel comfortable doing. And it also makes me feel good that I'm not tempting a man at church when I walk by. Okay, fair enough. Now, I've also thought about this, and I say this literally in all humility, but, even though I'm kind of an old man, I'm 38 years old, like, I'm in really good shape. Like, and I've been in shape since I was a really, really fat kid. And then I started getting in shape in my later teen years and all that. And so my body doesn't look gross, right? I don't have a repulsive body. Now, when I speak live, or especially when I speak in mixed settings with men and women, I am very aware of my body and what I look like so that I don't tempt a woman, right? Because like women are, you're attracted to what you're attracted to. No one's attracted to redheads and all that. I get it. My wife's a weirdo. But like, I am also very conscious about being modest and not like, I don't go to mixed pool parties where I'm walking around with my shirt off and, got people looking at my body, asking questions about my tattoos and all that. Like, so I try to be modest, but I'm doing that, yes, to honor God with my body and my modesty. But at the same time, if there is a woman that is potentially attracted to me, I don't want her thinking about me in any way that could lead to lustfulness. So kind of help me understand the practical, like everyday, like how do people dress in a way or comport themselves in a way that is God honoring in all the ways that we've kind of alluded to or discussed?
Yeah, the Israelites, when Moses comes down from the mountain after communing with God and getting the 10 Commandments, his face is glowing.
Right.
And the Israelites literally say, it's too much for us. Cover up. Right? So I think there is a way in which, if you can begin to see clothing as a way of helping people cope with the glory of God and who you are, great. Right? But if you're coming at it as, my body is shameful, that wouldn't be good. So practically speaking, there's a tension here, right? Because at some level, people are going to experience you and take you in, whether that's your face, right, or your body. And so how are you going to invite people to bear the weight of your glory and your power? Because again, we're talking about, two-dimensional views of beauty, right? Just physical beauty. And what I want to say is, what about lust for somebody's ability to speak, right? Or lust for somebody's capacity for empathy, right? Or lust for somebody's leadership qualities, right? There are other ways to lust for people's glory. So what I want to invite is, at some level, you need to be able to be shrewd as a snake, innocent as a dove. How are you going to let people bear the weight of who you are is what we're talking about. And like you're saying, there are ways in which you need to know that you have power. And how are you going to bring it to others? And I would also want to honor, you need to be able to grow up as a person, as a man, and being able to take in the power and glory of another person without lusting, with being moved with awe, right? Like, the disciples, when Jesus is transfigured, right? And he's glowing and they fall down, freak out, right? Like, they're overcome with the power of Jesus' presence. So how are you, all of us, says Paul, can, with unveiled faces, reflect the glory of God? So my sense, again, is we're talking about, a two-dimensional view of hot people. How do you cope with hot people? But I would say that's such an emaciated view of beauty in the world. You are a glorious person. There are no ugly people. No ugly people. Everyone bears the glory of God.
Yeah.
There are some people who are hiding it and not stewarding it. Right?
Yeah.
There are some people who are forsaking their glory, and they might look ugly to you. But my challenge is, they're just hiding. They're just hiding, even if it's behind how they cope with or present their body. So back to, again, it doesn't get you away from, how are you going to deal with glorious people who are moving? You've got to find a way to be able to be in awe of people and not lust. And that is the maturity that we all need to be able to grow into.
Okay, very good. One thing I want to talk about in terms of that is, okay, how do we look at purity? This is still in the section talking about purity culture. But there's a quote from the book where you say, we equated virginity with purity, and losing one's virginity was often described as irreparable damage that is a devastatingly destructive message. And so, virginity is equated with purity, but theologically speaking, why was it so important, for Jesus to be born a virgin? I think there's certainly a discussion there. And I would say that if you give up your virginity, if you choose to give up your virginity, that you have done irreparable damage, but it's not irredeemable damage, right? Because you can't get your virginity back, so it's irreparable, but it can be redeemed. So as I said earlier, you can't really put the toothpaste back in the tube, but there's a little quote a little bit later, and this gets back into kind of the lust conversation. So let me be clear. Sexual arousal is not lust. It does not make you impure. Sexual activity does not fundamentally ruin your body or your sexuality. It does not make you dirty, nor are virginity and purity the same. And then a little bit later, but the real danger here is that we actually repent of our sexual desire, fearing that our sexuality is inherently dirty and broken. So we've kind of talked about a little bit of this, Sam. Now, I would obviously argue that sexual arousal towards a person that is not your spouse is indeed lust, in the sexual type of lust, not lust for money or position or stuff, and it does make you impure. But you kind of also say that sexuality outside of marriage, that it doesn't make you dirty, where I would say it makes it way worse than that. And so Joby Martin, his latest book, Run Over by the Grace Train, talks about how sin doesn't make you bad, it makes you dead. Like, that's what sin does. It doesn't make you bad, it doesn't make you dirty, it makes you freaking dead. And so, like, if we belittle our own sin nature to the point where we don't see ourselves as hopelessly depraved, then we really don't understand the full weight and glory of the true gospel. Mm-hmm. And so, like, virginity and purity are one and the same. They're not the same, but they are one and the same. And so I guess I'm wondering, how do we apply this idea of awe, but separating it away from lust, while understanding that, look, if you've given yourself to another person sexually, you can't get that back. Now, it can be covered by the blood of Christ. That means it's redeemable, but it's not reparable. How do we turn that into an ethic that we could share with our kids?
Yeah, I think I would start with saying nobody's pure, right? We're born impure. That's the basis of our whole religion as Christians, is that you need a God that will make you pure again. So the idea that you have purity and you can lose it is already dead flat wrong, right? Like, no one's pure. Purity is what we get at the end of time when we meet Jesus again, is what I would say. So this idea of saying like you have purity and you can lose it by your virginity is already a broken script, because you don't have it. You're impure. That's the whole point, right? Is that you need Jesus. So I would start with saying that. The other thing I would say is the idea that, again, is something lost in giving away your virginity? Yes. But the idea that you're now damaged goods and, man, you're a dirty individual, I think is wrong. It's wrong, right? There is such a thing as sin, but we so often, equate. What I'm trying to address there is people that bear sexual shame and this sense of, there were all kinds of bad analogies in my youth group, at least, of like, now you're duct tape that lost its sticky side, right? Which is not how attachment works anyway. Right? Like, no, you can actually attach really well to other people still, that you don't lose your ability to attach, right? You can grow numb in ways through sexual activity and sin, but you can get that back too. So what I'm trying to invite is, I talked with a pastor when I wrote that section, who helped me to think how to language that. And he was the one that said, I sat with a woman that came up front during church to confess her sins. She said, I had sex with my boyfriend and now I'm impure. And God, I feel so dirty. And his point was, you were already impure. You didn't lose your purity in this moment. Purity is something that will come to us at the end of time when God finally sets us free, right? So I'm just trying to take it out of, it kind of sexualizes purity in a way that I just don't think the biblical text does fully, as if sexuality and purity are the same thing.
Okay, but it would have been appropriate for that pastor in that moment to say, look, sweetheart, or whatever you would call this young lady, look, young lady, from a physical standpoint, you have lost your sexual purity, but the truth and grace of the gospel is that you can't do anything to earn it, and you can't, white knuckle behave your way into getting it. Because that's one of the reasons why I rail on pastors that won't talk about abortion from the pulpit, because they're afraid of the women in their congregations that have had abortions. I'm like, no. That might be your road to the gospel for that woman, because when they realize, oh no, I murdered an image bearer of God for the reason of convenience. And then at that moment, they understand they're depraved and they understand, oh my gosh, I need a savior, and the savior's not me. So I guess it would be okay to say, yes, you have physically, from a sexual standpoint, made yourself impure. I don't know why we would avoid saying that. What this pastor did say, he did confront the sin and say, he's not making light of the sin of sexuality. What he's inviting is just thinking of purity only in sexual terms, as if, you had it and you lost it, versus, God, you needed it from the birth anyway. Is the point he's making. And he did not make light of the sin of sleeping with her boyfriend. He did say, your sins are forgiven. This is obviously what this woman is up front confessing. But he's inviting her to accept the grace of God in that moment, and not see you're now damaged goods and I'm sorry. There's no hope for you. So, trying to pull apart again this idea of what I think can become the damaged goods, sexual shame conversation. You're dirty now, and I just don't see that being the heart of Jesus when he sits with people. All right, very good. Well, let's go and get into our last question of the day. I think this kind of crescendos, or I guess bookends, what we talked about, where it's like, hey, we need to have these conversations. We need to have them with our kids, and we need to do them the right way. So this is a quote from chapter 5 called The Wounded Lover. As I've said, the sex talk is really hundreds of sex, body, and romance talks. Parents need to build with their son an ongoing conversation about his life, his identity, his heart. And within that conversation of life comes the conversation on sexuality. These are usually basic and short when they are young. By older childhood, most kids are ready to know the basics of sex. But of all times to be invited to know your sexuality and your body, puberty provides this rite of passage, marking a moment to get more intentional with these talks. So a natural rite of passage is puberty, which, regardless of what satanic doctors are doing, is not something that can be paused or stopped. But in these types of settings, to that parent out there that's got the 13-year-old like you, that's now, hey, we're on that short march to manhood, right? And it's time. Or maybe they're already in the throes of manhood and addiction and body changing and hair growing in places and all that kind of stuff. How do we as fathers, because you're talking to a bunch of fathers right now, and this is your last salvo, how do we have those hundreds of conversations effectively, appropriately, spaced out in the right amount, which coincides with the personality of the kid and what they can handle and shoulder at the same time? How do we practically do that from a kind of a high level view?
Yeah, well, I would say to wherever you are in the journey with your children, it's never too late to start. So you can always step in, even if your son's out of the house, right? You can come back to him and say, hey, there's some things I didn't talk to you about, right? But I would start with, the first thing that I would say to parents is you've got to deal with your own sexual shame, your own sexual story. How have you dealt with what's in your own body from your own formation? Do you know the top 10 things that shaped you sexually, right? Have you thought about those stories so that you're not bringing to your children your own unprocessed stuff, right, of your life? Have you engaged what shaped you sexually? Would be the first thing I'd invite parents to think about. So that, again, it's often not a lack of desire to have these conversations for parents. It's often something else that keeps them mute or makes them too hesitant to go there. So I think that's often their own shame from their own story. So I would start there. The second thing I would say is, be a place that's safe for their curiosity. Right? Do they feel free to talk to you about their bodies, about what things they've heard people talking about? My son brought to me the other day, my 13-year-old son, Dad, I heard somebody give a "that's what she said" joke. What is that? Yep. Right? That was a 1-minute sex talk. So I talked to him about what is a "that's what she said" joke, right? And why those aren't good, right? Why those make light of something that's meant to be, sacred. So, that's one place, is just meet them in their curiosity. The second thing I'd say is read your kids. Try to be a half step ahead of them. And you're not going to nail it, right? There's no try something. Just try and guess, right? Like, I think, your kid is being curious about where babies come from, right? Like, okay, I think it's time for us to tell them the basics of sex, right? This is where babies come from. Kind of meet them at the level of their curiosity would be the best thing to do. And then, again, using what's around you, lyrics in a song, a news article, like I said, the conversation that my son overheard with his buddies, right? Like when they talk about things that they're hearing at school or at youth group or with their friends or in culture, talk about that stuff. Go there with them. And I think they'll continue to bring their curiosity to you.
I want to echo that last sentiment there, the curiosity thing, but also I believe this was in The Intentional Father by John Tyson, where it talks about when your child is first exposed to porn. It doesn't matter what filters you have or all the stuff that you have in place at home, even though I'm pro all of those things, they're going to see it somehow. It's either going to accidentally find them on the internet because porn is like a heat-seeking missile, especially for children, or if they see it on a buddy's phone in the hallway. Another reason why no school should have like a no cell phone policy, so you're not sitting there looking at porn in the hallways. But the first time they look at porn and they come to you with that or you catch them, that is a very, very important moment in that kid's life and in y'all's understanding. Because if they, feel just completely demoralized and shamed, even though I do think shame is a tremendous motivator, man, are they ever going to come to you and talk to you about things that they're curious about or things that they're wondering about? And then if they don't come to you and you have a fully fledged philosophy on a biblical sexual ethic and they don't feel like they can talk to you, well, they're probably not going to talk to the youth pastor now. They're probably not going to talk to the main pastor now. They're probably going to talk to one of their idiot buddies, or they're probably going to let TikTok teach them about sexual ethics, or they're going to let, Pornhub teach them about sexual ethics. So I think that's a very, very important thing. But Sam, we've gone everywhere in this conversation. I appreciate you letting me kind of like tug and pull on some of the things that you said. You've helped me really understand your thesis a lot better, but that is all for me. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
No, Kyle, this has been great. I so welcome the tugging and pulling. I mean, this is sexuality, one of the most sacred parts of you, right? So don't take my book as the ultimate, right? You've got to, tug and pull on it, throw it against the wall if you don't like it. I mean, this is meant to be a conversation. So thanks for having that with me.
Great to have you, Sam. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed my time with Sam, but before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted.Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. So the link I've got for you today is to Sam's website. So if you want to pick up his book or check out anything else he's doing, you can do it there. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.